Yeah, I wonder if I'm seeing something different. Let me just go through that. One of the things that I'm seeing with the technology side of transformation is there seems to be a rush to take companies have workspaces, companies have IT environments, and there seems to be a rush at the moment for companies who are Microsoft houses to implement Copilot. And it seems like an obvious play, right? Low hanging fruit. Let's just get it in there. We just activate a few licenses, send them out across the landscape and see what happens. And that is, I wouldn't say that's a great technology strategy, because you should be thinking about what the business needs and then deploying the appropriate tools and thinking about integrations that solve the problems that you have as a business, not just implementing the easiest thing, right? But in that space, there becomes a conversation around, well, if we need to do, take it back a step, each of the models that is out there within application interfaces. So a GPT model might be in a chat GPT interface. Each of the applications, each of the models does something slightly different that's slightly better than some of the others, right? So you might go to one for narrative structure and realism. You might go to one to develop code bases. You might look at another one to develop sort of data tables or something. You might go to another one for deep research. So everybody will find their own sweet spots and their own workflows, but they don't all do the same thing well. And in that space, then you have the next tier up, which is generally software as a service, where different applications do different things depending on how they're configured and what they do. So you can go to an image generation software for to write you a story, for example. So it's important to figure out what it is that you want to do before you then go off and do it. But back to the Microsoft example, and I'm not picking up Microsoft, it's obviously business technology that everybody's used to using, Office and Windows and all of these things. In that scenario, you then have a second decision. So the first decision is, I'm going to implement this thing because it's within our environment, it's easy. We don't have to do all of the activities that we might need to do if we were to implement something completely different. The second decision, though, is the one where we say, well, now we've got one AI solution, we will stop any other AI solutions from being implemented. This is our governance. Everybody has to use this one tool, no others. And that second decision is causing pain, because a lot of what I'm seeing out there is, we want to do this, we want to do this other thing, we want to do this, we want these tools because they're specialist or niche tools. It's not just a general purpose tool. And then you start to get into this back and forth with technical teams who have said, well, we've got one. Why do you need another AI tool? So there's a kind of a lack of understanding, and that lack of understanding comes from a lack of common language, a lack of understanding of the use cases, the business problems that we're trying to solve, and all of these kinds of things. So I'm seeing this. Are you seeing some of that?
I am. And I think, from a technology perspective and an IT perspective, in some ways, the pandemic has made it even harder. Because for years, right, you would have your enterprise architects or whatever going, okay, this is our strategy, this is our tech roadmap. These applications are going to be refreshed, these ones are going to be retired, etc., etc., etc. And it takes a long time to put anything in. Yeah, suddenly the pandemic hit. Overnight, everyone went, oh right, okay, we just need to turn some stuff on, and it became a little bit chaotic, right? But on the whole, I would say it was managed chaos, because it was still broadly in your corporate environment. I know there are examples of people using Zoom the wrong way or whatever, but Microsoft is a good example, because overnight people were turning on Teams rather than having strategies and thinking about it. So just turn it on, and it worked. The challenge then was the mop up afterwards, because people turned Teams on, and in a few weeks, hundreds, thousands of different teams and channels and data sprawl and stuff everywhere. And even now, I think a lot of people are looking at it going, I've no idea what the right version of this particular document is or that particular document is. But what it did show is, if you push, how do you put it? If you push IT hard enough, they can just switch things on, and it helps. So that is set an expectation on technology for the wider part of the businesses to go, just push the button, just turn it on. And I think to your point around, they've gone, yeah, look, and again, not picking on Microsoft, but we'll go with that, because it is, it's the one that's in most clients. We've turned Copilot on. You're not having anything else. You've got that. We don't want to end up in the situation we were previously, where we had stuff all over the place. And that's why I'd always encourage them to say, look, whatever you call it, whether you call it a sandbox, lab, an innovation center, whatever it is, have some sort of landing zone where new tools can be put in there. Just get a few licenses, get people to use them, and in those environments, don't just have this is John from finance and Hillary from HR, and they're playing with these tools. Get your IT person in there with you, call them a product owner or whatever else you want to call them. Get people around those things going, actually, I can see what you're doing with it now. That use case, it might be able to be done on Copilot, right? It might be, now they understand it. Oh, actually, yeah, you can do that. It might also be, actually, the way you're using that, I can understand why Copilot wouldn't work. But then it's a case of going, okay, but do we think from a business point of view, the outcome or the value is sufficient to say, yeah, we're now going to go and invest in another tool and the management that goes alongside it. And it is that then the debate and the conversation rather than trying to get to the it's right or it's wrong.
So let's take that in two different directions. So the first direction is people and their skills. What you said, 100% correct, that you need to, if you've got two tools, you need to manage two tools. It's not double the overhead, but it's an additional overhead. You also need to make sure that your folks understand what they can and can't do with the tools that you have available to them. Now, take it back. I'm going to go back 6 months to I was at another conference and somebody stood up and made this point. And I'm going to try and do it word for word. It's not going to be perfect, but they made this point, and I thought this was an amazing point. What I said is, even now, you're going to get some people who will go on Instagram and say, right, I'm going to take a quiz to find out which friend I am. Am I Joey, am I Chandler, whatever. And I'm going to put my name, my mother's maiden name, my national insurance or social security number in, and it'll tell me what type of friend I am. And just in that one question, you've got so much to unpack, right? But the point that she was making was that you have folks in organizations who will still do things like that because they don't see the risk. Just this basic point about, do people understand if you have information security classifications in your organization? Do the folks that you employ, do they understand what they can and can't do in different tools? Because if they do, then this concept of a sandbox or an environment or a test or a pilot license or something, right? I don't mean flying a plane, but you're testing something for a period of time in your organization. That becomes easy if the workforce understands what information they are allowed to use in their play areas. It becomes very difficult if that basic understanding kind of isn't there. And there is a point around, when you join a big corporation and you go through the kind of induction training, don't give your passwords to everybody, don't set the building on fire, don't have fights with people, that kind of baseline of induction. We're not really giving people the responsibility as adults to figure out what they can and can't do. So there's a whole spectrum of things there in the people side where we're almost prohibited from the sandbox piece. On the technical side, we have some of the things that learning and development people want to use. They're graphic media tools. We want to make some avatars, we want to make some cartoons, we want to make some pretty pictures, whatever it happens to be. Those are just licenses that you buy. When you're doing those things, if you want to make an image in any of the image generation tools, you want to make a video, Sora, VO, whatever you choose to use, the chances of there being company information in there, pretty slim. I want a nice picture of a boardroom with a bunch of people in suits so I can make a point about leadership. There's no company information in that. So we have these two sort of points where, one, does your workforce, do your employees understand what information they can and can't use in different tools? And on the other side, we have, does your workforce understand where they can play, where they're just not even using company data? Because some folks will say, I'm not allowed to use this at all with company data, but I want to make a picture of a bunch of people with suits. It's kind of okay, right? So the technology capabilities versus and the use cases versus the understanding of company information. These two things need to come together. Are you seeing that nuance being talked about when you have these conversations?
I think it's a great point, and I think you probably get to the heart of a lot of the challenge, right? Because the conversations aren't happening from what I see. Or if they are happening, they're happening in little silo teams rather than at a company level. So if you take a step back and you go, okay, you talk about information racing, where's the risk actually sit? Who's the one that gets in a mess? So this is an example. So you own a car. You let a child into your driving seat and drive the car. And they drive it into a wall. No injuries, but the car's damaged and stuff. Where's the risk sit? Is the risk with the child because they got in the car and once they were in the car, it's their risk? Or is a risk with you who owns the car and therefore you shouldn't have done that and therefore you're the one that's in bother? And I think when I look at it from a corporate point of view, corporate mindset when it comes to risk will always default to it's my vehicle. All the risk sits with me. Well, even if you're not in a corporate, even if you're in a small business like we are, you as the owner, the risk is on you. If something goes wrong, you're the one that takes the hit, no one else. So it's very easy sometimes to fall into that trap of you can't do anything, because if I let you do something and you get it wrong, it's me that carries that risk, not you, ultimately. Those honest conversations don't happen. What you get is what you were talking about earlier, which is either people are too afraid, or you get the big long list when you start the company, shalt not do X, Y, Z, all the way through to triple Z, massive long list of things. So it's like, right, I'll just sit here and I'll do my job and not touch anything. You'll have organisations that over the years will have. Internet was always a great example, right? Am I blacklisting sites? Am I whitelisting sites? Am I, how much am I locking things down? But to your point, there's that whole grey area of, okay, get all that. But if someone's wanting to create a picture of, I need a pretty boardroom with some folks in suits, is that really a risk? Is that okay? And how do we have that more grown-up conversation that says, look, here are the guardrails for the company. Here's some real big, do not put in, the company's financial data, certain things not to put in. And I think some of that goes beyond work environment, incidentally, as well, to the point you were saying from your session a few weeks back, where someone stood up and said, people will still put in their first name, surname, mother's maiden name and stuff, just to, what friend am I? That's not a work responsibility, right? Some of these things aren't being taught. And essentially, I was sat with my daughter the other day doing her some finance work, because she's off to university in September, hopefully. And she came down and says, I've opened another bank account. What do you mean you've opened another bank account? Oh, mate, mine's on Monzo, whatever it was, so I've opened one. It makes it easier. Okay. But you understand now, you've already opened one, and that's now second one. You've got something called a credit file, and I didn't know that. And actually, we ended up sitting for 2 hours talking through. Says, why are these things not taught in school? How do I not know some of these things? So I think some of these basics, it's difficult as a corporate business, but yes, we want to treat people like adults, but at the same time, we have an assumption that they're joining us as an organisation. How to put it? With a level of common sense that may or may not be there. So how do you put the right guardrails in place without going, well, I've assumed people know these things, so I don't need to say it. If I don't say it and it goes wrong, what do I do? So it's a really tricky grey area, but it's got to start with some open conversations. Now, what do you think?
So yes and no, right? It has to start with some tricky conversations. But back to the point that we started with. I think we started with this, or maybe it was the second point. We're assuming in conversation around AI disruption that people will be good at critical thinking, problem solving, judgment, the things that we expect people to do. But on the flip side, we're treating the workforce like children, saying, don't touch the red button, don't put your hand in the fire. And those two things can't really go together. We have to some degree, homogenize that people are adults, people have some kind of responsibility, and we have to be able to trust them to make some judgment. Because if we never trust people to make any judgments, we can't then say the future is where people have the ability for judgment, to oversee machines, to make sure that the decisions that are being made are correct. Those two populations are not the same. And if those two populations are not the same, how do we bridge that gap? And it can't just be an upskilling conversation, because the gap is huge. How do we do that?
Question is, are we going to solve it on this conversation? Because I think it's fascinating. And to your point on L&D, if I look at most organisations we work with, L&D will tend to be career pathways, the upskilling, all that stuff. A lot of organisations we work with don't tend to see it as, where's the, for want of a better phrase, where's the curiosity L&D? Where's the bit of helping people learn for the sake of learning, not just for doing a job? And perhaps that's part of the conversation. We've moved away from, not just in corporates, but in society generally, we've moved away from learning for the joy of learning, debating for the joy of debating and finding new things, to we learn to get a job, or we learn to learn something new and we can increase our salaries, or there's always we're doing it for this reason or that reason, rather than let's just do it because I'm back to the very first point. I'm just genuinely curious. Don't know where I'm going to go with it, but I'm just genuinely curious. And we have to feed that, because it's been trained out of us over the last few decades, because it's been the constant, you need to do this because then you're going to increase your salary. You need to do this, you can get a bigger house. You need to do this or this to get up the next ladder of the on the career path. And we've lost some of that wonder is probably a better phrase. The wonder of, oh, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
But are we in a position where that kind of luxury, the luxury to learn in a way that's unfettered by the trappings of capitalism and economics, is there? That sounds to me like it's a luxury commodity to have that time, because 2025 is upon us. We're in full swing. We're a third of the way through now, and every single person that I've spoken to this year, without failure, has told me it's busy. It's busier than it's ever been. So we have time poverty is a real thing, but we also have people need to learn such that they can make more money. We have the markets are not great, right? Different countries are struggling in terms of GDP and things like that. So we have all of these factors which lead us to a point, which is people feel economically squeezed. And if people, I mean, society is feeling economically squeezed, we hear this about the squeezed middle class. I can't remember exactly what the phrase is. But if we're in that situation, then the luxury to learn for the pleasure of learning versus having to learn for the sake of paying your bills, it's going to be different. You'll to some degree we need to be able to afford the luxury of learning as a pursuit. That doesn't seem like it's easily solvable. And we have all of these attributes. The World Value Survey, I think it was, Inglehart, etc., have studied that how cultures shift over time depending on the economic uncertainty that they're facing. So liberalism generally is a society is well off. They can afford to be liberal in their views. When they're not well off, they tend to be more conservative and they go back and forth, etc. We see this with the politics of the day at the moment and for the last probably 10 years. But that leads us down a path of, if we can't learn for the pursuit of education, then to some degree we're not going to be economically prosperous, and that's going to lead us down a cycle. And we have the disruption of AI on top of this, where there are a lot of things we don't even need to learn, but we're not really sure what we should be learning. That's a very difficult conundrum. What do you think?
It is, but as you were talking, a thought occurred to me. So he said, it's busy, people are always busy. And then I always remember a phrase from years back, and I'm sure most people have heard it over time. If you ever worked in project land, I used to work with a program manager years ago who always used to say, that's just busy work. It's busy for the sake of busy. And yeah, it's busy and people are using their time. But at the same time, we're talking about AI potentially freeing time up, right? Because we've got these tools that can take a lot of that busyness away, all of that standard stuff away. Now, wouldn't it be nice? And this might be my liberalism coming out now. Wouldn't it be nice if, as a company, you went, well, actually, do you know what? Let's say, for example, today I employ 100 people, and our strategy is, as most corporate strategies always are, over the next X years, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, whatever it is, we're going to double the business every year and all that. Because that's what everyone always says, right? What if I can do that? Still keep 100 people, so I'm not taking any jobs away. I might not be creating as many jobs. That's something that's going to be interesting. But by embracing AI, I can not have to add as many people to my business. I can still achieve my business strategy. So as my owner or the investor, I'm happy to my outcome's been achieved. But the time pressure's been taken off my people to a degree, and now they can start engaging in learning for learning's sake. It starts rethinking that whole, it's a paradigm shift of corporate mentality of, yes, corporates, you're always going to exist because you've got shareholders or whatever else that want to see that number going up. They don't actually care. Could be unfair to some investors, right? But normally they don't really care how you get to that point. As long as that number goes up, obviously that number goes up. So if you can find a way that says, I can at least or at minimum retain the people I already have, so I'm not getting rid of anybody, and I can then invest in the technologies, because over time, the technology will be a quantum less than if I'd double my staff costs. And I've given my people some time back, whether it be 20% of their time back a week or whatever else, to just learn. A lot of companies do that today, right? A lot of companies will have, not necessarily learning days, but they'll have you get a day, a quarter, whatever, to go and do fundraising or do some work with a charity or whatever else. Why not think of learning in the same way? And then do you rethink about the technology and the AI side and say, well, actually, it's not quite as scary because my people shouldn't be fearing these things because it's going to take their jobs. They can go, well, hang on, back to the 10x example. If we embrace some of these technologies and get them to work as us so we don't lose our identity, but it can make me 10 times more productive and I get some time back to learn something new, over time, you're going to have a more creative cultural environment.